Chuck, welcome to the board.
Well,
We're glad to have you. We're very lucky to have you.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I thought maybe what I could do this morning is just go over with you some of the very basics on some of our meetings and memberships and so forth, and things that you should know a little bit about.
Is it okay if I take some notes?
Oh,
Is that all
sure,
right?
sure. But this
Okay.
is really quite simple. I mean,
Wow.
it's not that difficult. There are only two types of meetings, of course. There's the board meeting, and then there's the membership meeting.
Okay, I think I got it.
Good.
Board meeting, membership meeting.
Right.
I got it. Okay.
Now, the board meeting has to take place every 100 days, but two of them have to be after business hours. Okay?
Wait a minute. Don't we meet monthly?
Well, yeah, we do. That's correct, because we make some of those decisions. But as long as we give 10 days prior notice, okay? Well, that's, of course, except if it's a budget ratification meeting, because then that's 15 to 60 days prior notice. But by the way, that's a membership meeting.
This is really confusing. I mean, I thought, well, anyway, go ahead. Maybe I'll get this
keep in
figured
mind
out.
that homeowners, are always invited to these meetings. Well, except, of course, if it's an executive session, and then they're not allowed to attend.
Wait a minute. So there's a difference between membership and executive? Oh man, I don't know. This
Well,
is,
you know,
really
but there are
got me
some-
gone here. I don't know.
Well, there are some other kind of meetings, but we can get into special meetings or emergency meetings, and they have different regulations. So we have to go over those too. But for now, you have the basics. And, well, do you understand all the stuff about the election? Do you have any questions?
I don't think I'll ever get this right.
Hello, I'm Mary Rendina, Executive Director of the Nevada chapter of the Community Associations Institute, and I'd like to welcome you to the CAI media presentation. CAI provides comprehensive education to board members, homeowners, and community managers. This presentation series, developed by CAI's Nevada chapter, brings educational information to board members all around our state, and it has been developed and presented by experienced board members, all of whom have completed CAI's award-winning Decal Education Series. We thank our generous sponsors who make these free presentations possible.
We at the Nevada Real Estate Division applaud you for volunteering to serve as a board member on your homeowners association.
Board members play a vital role in successful HOA management, which is why we believe that board member training and ongoing education is critical.
We're proud to support the effort of CAI's Nevada chapter to provide this innovative digital media training.
We'd also like to remind you that you can also contact the Real Estate Division or CAI for additional help.
Enjoy the presentation.
Hello, my name is Vicki. I'm here on behalf of CAI to interview Chuck Niggemeyer on meetings and elections. Before we get started with the topics, Chuck, would you just tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. I'm a member of CAI, and I have been for several years. I'm also a DECAL, which stands for Dedicated Community Association Leader. I've gone through their 25-hour instruction course, which has helped me become a board member, and I would encourage everyone who has a chance to do that. I'm also a board member on my board and have been for over 10 years. So that's kind of where I come from.
You've got a lot of experience, I can tell. This is
Well.
going to be a good segment. So if it's okay with you, Chuck, I think what I'd like to do is break this lesson today into 4 parts.
Sure.
Meeting types requirements, effective meetings, election eligibility and process, and executive board elections.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. So let's start off, first of all, can you please tell me what is the purpose of a meeting?
Well, the purpose of a meeting is to make decisions. If you're a corporate owner or owner of a corporation, you want to make those decisions, and that's what your HOA really is. You make those decisions based on the business judgment rule, which says that you actually are acting in an informed basis, good faith, and you honestly believe that your decisions are based in the best interests of your community. So that's kind of where that comes from. Mm-hmm. There's really only 2 times that you make decisions. An open board meeting or members meetings would be the proper time to make decisions. You wouldn't want to make a decision over the phone necessarily, or email traffic, or a discussion in a workshop where you're thinking about maybe you've got a contract that you're discussing with fellow board members. You don't make the decision there. You wait until the meeting and you make that decision there. Actually, the board, for the most part, sets policies, and then your community manager would actually be the person that does implement them. So that's really the purpose of a meeting, okay?
Okay, all right. So could you elaborate on the types of meetings that we're going to be talking about today?
Well, realistically, there are only two types of meetings that we as board members really are concerned with, and that would be an open board meeting or a members meeting. I would kind of like to speak first about members meetings.
Okay.
Members meetings are normally held on a yearly basis unless your bylaws specify something different. You try to meet annually. Occasionally you get out of cycle and maybe you can't do it every 12 months. And if that's the case, why Nevada would say have it the following March the 1st. So you pick up that annual requirement there.
Okay.
Most boards probably refer to a members meeting on an annual basis as the meeting where they elect members of the executive board. The other activity that occurs at a members meetings would be a budget ratification. That would be, you would notice that for 14 days, a minimum ahead to 60 days, you would send out the budget to your homeowners, gather at your members meetings, and they're going to vote on it, and hopefully they ratify it. Now, if a majority of the members don't like the budget for some reason, well, then you just use the old budget that was in being at the time. And then submit a new budget as soon as you can, another meeting, maybe they'll ratify it this time, hopefully they do.
Okay.
Switching over to the board meeting, which is the other one I mentioned, you have to have a board meeting at least quarterly or not less than every 100 days. Now your governing documents may say you have meetings more frequently than that. It could be monthly, might be every 2 months, but whatever your documents really say is when you would have the meetings. But the minimum requirements quarterly are not less than every 100 days.
Okay. So you've talked about different types of meetings. Are all of the meetings you talk about required to be held?
Well, really not all of them. I mean, some of them you may never, ever, have.
Okay.
Like, for instance, maybe you could go through a term of office and never have an emergency meeting. I think that would be great, You can't anticipate that too much. Special meetings occur occasionally, especially if you had to have a meeting where you want to vote on new equipment or something that's been acquired in your community. Committee meetings are going to occur, if you have a board member who's on the committee, those will occur on an as-needed basis.
Okay.
You'll see a listing up there that talks about executive board closed sessions. I will speak to that a little bit later. I think it's a topic I will expand on later.
Okay.
So to answer your question, no, not all of these meetings are required all the time, and some of them may never be required. So
Okay.
that's kind of the way that goes.
Okay, all right. So we've talked about meetings that are required or not. Now can you just tell us a little bit about the requirements of a meeting?
Well, all meetings have to be noticed, okay? So you're going to send out a notice that specifies the date, time of the meeting, and that notice will include a copy of the agenda, so that's included with it. It will also include the fact that all board members will remind themselves that homeowners get a chance to speak at their meetings. And speaking of that, board members need to remember that all the board meetings are going to be audio recorded, so that,
Oh, audio recorded?
yes.
And who's responsible for that?
Well, I think normally the secretary would be responsible for doing it,
Okay.
but realistically, probably your community manager will bring the equipment and record the meeting for
Okay.
you. That audio recording, by the way, has to be made available to homeowners within 30 days, or a summary of the minutes anyway. Speaking of minutes, sometimes I get the question about how long do we keep minutes, okay? Well, actually, you keep the minutes forever. They're the history of your association, and they would be kept until maybe your association was terminated or dissolved for whatever reason. Other documents, certain financial records, maybe bids that you've considered will be kept for about 10 years, and then they could be retired at that point
Okay.
in time. So you know, it's important to remember that about minutes of the meeting would be included, like how did you vote if you had to make a business decision and during the meeting, and who voted which way. Members that were there or absent would be there. The substantive remarks that have been made should be included in the minutes. And if a homeowner wants an agenda item that they brought to be included in the minutes, well, you can do that at the same time. So that's kind of the way minutes are kept and the requirements of meetings.
Okay. So are there any other requirements?
Well, yes. You know, there's a reserve requirement where the board annually should review their reserve funds to be sure that the amount of money you have in there is adequate so that you can repair and replace common elements that need that. Perhaps you've added a new system, like a surveillance system, for instance. You would want that included into your reserve fund, and you could do that when you review it annually.
Okay.
Then every 5 years, you have to do a complete reserve study. At that point in time, everything is brought up to speed, look at inflation, so that you really have adequate amount to remove and replace, you know, all the equipment that would be included. It's like a maintenance plan for all of your common elements. Financials, the board needs to review those at least quarterly or not less than every 100 days. It's kind of like the requirements of when the board meets. So it follows those guidelines. Your financials, you look at your reserve accounts, your operating accounts to be sure that everything is there and it should be in the proper manner. You look at the reconciliation of the records, and if possible, you should get the originals of the financials from your financial institution. It helps because copies could possibly be fraudulently altered. You don't want that to occur.
Good point.
The last thing I would like to talk about is executive boards and the way they vote on items in their board meetings. For instance, if you were considering, I say, a landscaping bid, and one of the bids that comes in happens to be maybe somebody you're related to, or it could be a son, for instance, or you need to disclose that information to the board members and also to the association there. Because you don't want conflicts of interest to be there and never have that appearance whether it exists or not. And when it comes time to vote on that particular bid, then you should abstain from the voting and not be involved. It's important because, as I said, conflicts of interest can really be a problem, and we know in today's society there's no room for that.
Another really good point, Chuck.
Yes. So I think that's probably pretty much the requirements of meetings as I see it right now.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, and I think we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. This is our second segment of this interview with Chuck Niggemeier. The first segment we talked about meetings and requirements. In this segment, we're going to talk about meeting effectiveness. So, Chuck, where would you like to start?
I think I'd like to begin by talking about a couple of meetings that I mentioned that maybe you would never actually have while you're on the board. I think I'll start with emergency meetings.
Okay.
I think the very term emergency probably explains it pretty well. You can't anticipate that. You don't know when it's going to happen. But it could be a situation where maybe the health or the welfare or the safety of maybe your community or the homeowner could be jeopardized. So it's something that's going to require the executive board to make a decision and meet. Since it's got to be fairly soon, and it's quick, it's an emergency, probably you can't notice that in a normal manner. Probably impractical to think you're going to mail it out, but the notice could be sent out by email, or you could hand deliver those notices if you needed to your homeowners. Make them available in a mail room or exercise room, something of that nature. So they know that the meeting's going to occur and you get it out as soon as you can. That's about it on emergency meetings.
Okay.
I did mention earlier that we're going to talk about executive sessions
Yes, you did.
and some of those closed sessions that occur.
Okay.
So when would a board meet in a closed session? Well, if you had a problem and say you had some legal action or litigation pending on your community, you probably want to meet in a executive closed session to discuss what the problem might be and a course of action to follow.
Okay.
If you have an association employee who's a problem to you, you definitely would probably want to discuss that in a closed session and to fix the situation or maybe replace that employee. Perhaps you're having a hearing and someone's violated a governing document or something and you need to decide about what are we going to do here.
Right.
Maybe someone's not paying an assessment on time, so you need to consider that. You could also consider possible action for foreclosure information. Not that you made the decision, but you could formulate a plan of action.
Okay.
I would remind you that there will be no audio taping of executive closed board sessions. Minutes are kept, but the minutes now will only be released to those that are actually participating in the executive session. Something to remember. I would stress to you that information in executive board sessions are confidential. It's confidential information, so no pillow talk, and definitely do not talk to your neighbor about what went on in an executive session. If you do that and you violate that, you could be sanctioned by the real estate division in this state. I don't think you want that.
No, you don't want
So
that to
those are the
happen.
two types of the special meetings that I wanted to talk about and discuss a
Okay.
little bit about that.
Okay. Well, Chuck, it sounds like you have lots of experience at running meetings. Can you share with us some hints on how to run an efficient, effective meeting?
Sure. I would tell you that your effective meetings probably start ever in front of when you ever have that meeting to start out with. What I mean by that is 3 to 5 days ahead of your scheduled board meeting, you probably will receive a board package from your community manager. And you should, as a board member, open that package up immediately, you review it, and if you have any questions, call your community manager then. Get those questions answered, because the last thing you want is to show up in the meeting, you have that question, you ask your community manager, and maybe they can't answer the question. So they're embarrassed, you're embarrassed, and that meeting effectiveness goes away right
Not
there.
good.
I would encourage all the rest of the board members also to do the same. So if they have any questions, those can be answered. And the other reason you need to review that package is there might be a mistake that needs to be corrected. So you want to have that fixed before you have the meeting. No
Yes.
bad information to be given out. Ascertain, if you can, all the board members that are going to be at the meeting. It's important because you need a quorum. And why do you need a quorum in a lot of cases? Well, if your attorney's there, you don't have a quorum and you can't have the meeting, you're going to pay him anyway. So think about the expense that's involved. If you have guests coming, let's say you have a vendor that's going to come and maybe submit a contract in the future, and they want to address your board. So it's good to let them know the time and the place of the meeting. So if you follow the type of an example, I think you'll make your meetings much more effective.
Okay.
Before I move on, though, I would like to talk a little bit about how you orientate the meetings and how you set up protocol and thing. How you orientate, it's important that people understand how meetings are organized. And I'll start back with the executive board session again. So if that's occurring, normally you're going to have your board members in a closed session, if an executive meeting. You'll have your community manager. You may have your legal advisor. And let's say you're having a hearing, why they will be there and maybe they'll have a witness or they may have a legal advisor. So if you can put them at a table with you or kind of in a semicircular fashion, then they're beside each other and it's peer-to-peer, reduces the tension and makes the whole session much more easy. So we want to make them feel at ease. I mean, you are neighbors and you don't want to forget that.
That's right.
Now, in an open board meeting, you want your board facing your homeowners. They would be in front of you, you would be in the front of the room or the side, depending on how the room is set up. And you face the homeowners so that during the agenda item where they're discussing things on the agenda with you, they address you, the board. Then when that's finished, you conduct your business, and then the board members face each other because if you're conducting business at that time of the association. If you face your homeowners while that's going on, they think you're in a discussion with them. They interrupt you, they ask questions, and guess what? The meeting effectiveness goes away. It's important to get through a meeting, if you can, in 2 hours. And if you don't have control of the meeting, you know, you've lost the effectiveness. So it's just one of the things you need to be aware of. And then we come to members' meetings. That's completely different. In a members' meeting, everybody gets to talk, okay? So the chair should recognize each speaker as they want to get up, they address the board, and then when they're finished, everyone is finished, then you can allow follow-up questions if you want to. Again, it becomes a timing factor now. You got to realize that you may have to limit discussion at times. So when all the homeowners have finished, then you, the board, can respond to them. And if there are questions that come up, fine. You know, you answer those questions. And it's just one of the ways that you need to be sure you close that loop. Either you answer the question, and if you can't, then let your community manager, you know, write them down, get back to them to be sure that they know that you care about that. You know, there are a lot of things that affect meetings. And one of them I might mention is NRS 116, okay?
What is NRS? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't understand that.
That's the Nevada Revised Statute 116. That's the actual chapter.
Okay.
And you can see on the slide there are several of those listed that board members probably need to become familiar with. You're not going to memorize them. I don't think I could. I mean, you're not a lawyer. Well, you could be and be on the board. Probably you're not. But it's better if you have that NRS with you, like I said a minute ago, and your governing documents, which would be something of this nature. Then when questions come up, you certainly can answer them, because sometimes people say, well, why is that? Well, the answer is right in front of you. If you have them, it's easy.
Yes.
You know, so pretty much that's the way we conduct meetings and the procedures in there.
Okay.
There's a couple I would like to point out. You'll see one up there listed 3108. That's the one that covers frequency of meetings, and also it covers the fact that people have a right to speak at the meetings or audio tape them. At 31084, I believe is the number I remember, is how board members would vote and abstain from voting. 3187 would be the rights of people to have items added to the agenda if they wanted to in the minutes. And the last one up there, that 3109, that's quorum requirements.
Okay.
You know, so it outlines what's a quorum and how you conduct your meetings.
Okay.
Other than that, that's pretty much it
All right.
on the rules and the regulations for meetings.
All right.
I think I'm about ready to take a break. What do you think?
Okay. I think that's a good idea.
All
We'll
right.
take a little break and we'll be right back. Hello and welcome back. Chuck, could you please remind us what we've discussed so far and just give us a glimpse of what's ahead in this section of our discussion?
Sure. You know, back when we started the interview, we talked about types of meetings and requirements of meetings. And we moved to how you do effective meetings and some of the special meetings that you have. So I think that's enough probably on meetings. I would like to maybe move and let's talk about elections and how you get elected to the executive boards. Does that sound okay?
That sounds great.
So first, let's look at who's eligible to be on a board. So to be a board member and executive in your association, you have to be a homeowner. You have to own your own unit there. The state would tell us that we need a minimum of 3 board members. That's the minimum board you can have. Some associations obviously are larger. They're going to have 5. Some will have 7. But that is the minimum requirement, is 3.
Okay.
You probably also notice on the slide there's a description up there. It says non-individual entities. Do you understand that?
I did notice that, Chuck. I don't have a clue what that means.
Well, maybe I can clarify that
Okay,
a little
great.
bit. Think of it as a partnership or a partner that owns maybe a unit in your association. They could actually be an officer, like I mean a president, a vice president,
Okay.
secretary, treasurer, something of that nature. Or maybe you have a trustee or a beneficiary of a trust that owns a unit in your association, they would also be eligible to be an officer, and they don't necessarily, they can't be a board member, but they could be an officer.
Okay.
Or maybe you have a limited liability company or a member of them that has a unit in your association. They could also be an officer, but not a director. So those are the type of people that are eligible to be on your board or to be an officer on your board. There are certain people who cannot be on your board and are not eligible to be.
Okay.
A person, or maybe the person's spouse, maybe a blood relation, adoption, and if they are functioning as a community manager for your association, then they cannot be on your board or they can't be an association, an officer in your association.
Okay.
That would also apply to master associations. So those are the people
Good point.
who would be eligible to be on your board.
Okay.
Okay? So how do you get nominated?
Good question.
All right. Well, 30 days prior to an election or an event for an election, your association's going to send out to all the homeowners a nomination form. And on that form, then a person can self-nominate themselves, or the board actually could nominate people if they want to, or if you have a nominating committee, they can also do that. Now, with that form, when it goes out, the board can decide at that point in time that when the nominations come back, let's say you don't have the exact number, you might have an equal number or less than, then the board can decide if that's the situation, the nominations come back, the election is over, and it's done by acclamation.
Okay.
But they must do that prior to sending out the nomination forms.
Oh, okay.
Okay, otherwise then ballots will have to go out.
Good to know.
So that's how you get nominated.
Okay.
All right?
Uh-huh.
So after the nominations, then there's the election phase.
Okay.
So the nomination forms will come back, and on that form will be a disclosure by anyone who is self-nominated that will say, for instance, I don't have a conflict of interest within the community, and I'm a member in good standing.
Okay, excuse me, I'm interrupting you again, but
That's okay.
can you clarify what good standing means, please?
Basically, good standing means you don't owe the association any money.
Oh, okay.
You're current on your assessments, and maybe you had a construction fine, but you've taken care of that. So you
Okay.
don't owe the association any money.
Okay.
That disclosure on the form is important because when the ballots go out, that disclosure information is going to be included there. So you want to be sure that when you disclose that information, that you're factual, you're in good standing, and you're good. You don't have to worry about that type of a situation.
Great.
Terms of office. Normally 3 years would be the extreme amount that you could serve between elections.
Okay.
More likely, your governing directives and bylaws will probably say election every 2 years. I'm thinking that's what most of them, but you need to look
Okay.
because it will specify what it should be. Be a staggered term, and what I mean by that is, like my board that I'm on, we're a 3-member board. So every year we elect 1 member, and the following year we would elect 2. So therefore, you never elect the whole board at the same time, which it's not a good situation to do that. You can look at the governing directives to be sure that you're following them in accordance with what would be the
Okay.
normal way.
Sure.
There are some exceptions we don't need to go into now, and it has to
Okay.
do with what the declarant might say with somebody on your board.
Okay.
So that's how you get nominated, how you get elected.
All right.
All right?
So you mentioned acclamation.
I did.
Can we go back to that a little bit and talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. So when your nominations come back in, and if the number of vacancies on your nomination form is equal to or less, and the board made the determination before they sent the nomination forms out, that if that case where you had equal to or less members for the election, then you could declare the election done by acclamation, and your new directors would be elected and take office at that time.
Okay.
However, if that determination was not sent out with the nomination forms and they come back, then you don't have any choice. You must do the election by secret ballot at that point in time. The other requirement for a secret ballot, which is the best of the requirements, would be if you get more people running for the board than you have vacancies. That's ideal because that means you
Yes.
have a lot of interest in your community. So when that situation occurs,
Exactly.
secret ballot's the way you're going to do it.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So let's assume that we have lots of people running for office.
Yes.
Are people allowed to campaign?
Absolutely. You know,
Cool.
the state would say you can campaign for 90 days ahead of the actual date when you actually have the election.
Okay.
So that's the way that happens. Candidates can send out candidate information statements. You know, they normally are one page in length, and that can be done several ways. Perhaps you have a newsletter. You can put it in your newsletter. You could send it out by email. So that's all done at communication expense. And maybe you have a closed circuit TV. You could do it that way. So
good
you can
idea.
they can distribute their candidate information that way. Now, if they don't want it that way, they can send it out themselves.
Okay.
And so they can request from the association the addresses of everyone, okay? You can give them the addresses, but you don't include the names.
Oh,
That's
okay.
more of a confidential problem. So they get the addresses, they send it out, and they can include their one-page letter, information about why they're qualified for the
Okay.
board. I might point out also that if the association provides those addresses, then the candidate that wants them would tell you and certify that they're using them only for an election process.
Oh,
And if
okay.
they use them for something else, the board is protected. They're not liable for any misuse of that list.
Okay.
So that's kind of the way that goes.
Okay.
So the information has been sent out, and we're ready now to determine who's
Ready
going to
have
be
an
elected to
election.
the board.
All right. Okay.
So
before the election, let's take a break,
sounds good to me.
and we'll be right back.
Right.
Okay, here we are again. You know, Chuck, you have covered a lot of material so far, and it's been really good information. But I know you've got more. It seems to me I remember hearing you say something about secret ballots. Can you kind of expand on that?
Sure. Secret ballots is probably the most common way we elect board of directors.
Okay.
And just like the name would imply, secret ballot is just that. So no election by acclamation. Secret ballots are mailed out by the association with a return envelope, and it's sent to everyone that has an address in your community, whether they're in residence or not. So the address on record is where that ballot will be sent. And then normally the owners will have at least 15 days to return that to the association and your board. At that point in time, then you would have them back prior to your members meeting, which, remember I mentioned, is the annual meeting normally that you're familiar with. And you would gather at that point in time at the members meeting with the ballots in hand so you can count them. So that's
Okay.
the question. And I would remind you that since this is a members meeting again, there's no quorum requirement. So
Okay, good to know.
just a little difference between the board
Sure.
meeting and the members meeting. I just reemphasize that.
Okay.
So the ballots that are returned then are the only ones that are going to be counted at the time. So you gather for your members meeting, and you would turn the ballots over to a ballot counting committee. That could be as big, small as you want it to be. It's important, however, that they remain in the room, I think, if possible, so when the ballots are being counted, there's pretty easy to tell if there's any fraudulent
Exactly.
activity going on.
Transparency.
Once in a while I get asked the question about, well, say a homeowner shows up at your members meeting and he has a ballot in hand. Well, you should look, is it sealed? Because if it's sealed, it's probably okay to turn that over to your ballot committee.
Okay.
If it was open, I probably wouldn't, because they might have a couple ballots in there and you don't know who's voting in that case.
Yes.
So the ballot committee gets all the ballots, they'll open them there in the same room in the presence of all your members, count them, and the results are known. I would reemphasize also, and remember, if you're an incumbent board member or you're a nominee, you have no access to those ballots whatsoever. You cannot participate in the opening or the counting. So just remember that. That's a restriction
Good
on
point.
that. And obviously, common sense would say you wouldn't want that anyway.
Sure.
So the ballots are counted. and your new directors are elected right there on the spot. So now we have a new board. We're ready to go.
You're ready to
Okay?
go. That's
right.
great.
Isn't that neat?
Okay, now I'm going to throw a monkey wrench in here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm going
Okay.
to do it to you.
All
Sorry.
right.
What if somebody resigns from this newly elected board?
So now we have a vacancy. That's
Yep.
what you're saying. Well, you know, the board has a duty and a responsibility, and they're authorized to appoint people to fill vacancies on the board when that
Okay.
occurs. Couple ways to do that. On your election, you probably, assuming that you had someone that didn't get enough votes to be elected to the board, you could approach them and say, hey, are you still interested in being on the board? If so, ask them if they would fill a vacancy. They might. That'd be
Okay.
good. Or maybe you have a past director that's still there. You could approach them, ask them the same question.
Okay.
It's better to get somebody who wants to be on the board than you just arbitrarily appoint someone.
That makes sense.
And I might point out that they're only going to fill that vacancy till the expiration of that term,
Okay.
or if there's a scheduled election.
Oh,
So
okay.
let's say you're on a 2-year term, for instance. I'll clarify that a little
Okay.
bit. 6 months into that term, somebody resigns. Okay? So at that 6-month point, they would be in that vacancy, and 6 months later is your next scheduled election. At that point in time, that vacancy would be filled by election.
Okay,
So that's how that works.
okay.
All right? Is that clear?
That's clear.
Okay.
Next step.
Oh, the next step. Let's see. Yes, we have to certify the directors. I mean,
Okay.
that is something that people shouldn't take lightly. 90 days after you've been elected to your board, you have to certify to the state on a form that they give you that you've actually read those governing documents that I mentioned a while ago in NRS 116. Now, that says on that form that you understand those, you reviewed them to the best of your ability.
Right.
Are you going to know them by heart? No, I don't think anybody would probably ever say that. But it's a step that shouldn't be taken lightly. You are signing that, and
Okay.
the state knows it, and you should take it seriousness because you are a board director.
Okay. Now, is there any other steps that you need to take to get yourself organized as a board?
Well, yes, there is. So we've elected everybody. All right. So now the election's over. Our members' meeting can be terminated at that point in time. And then we open up another meeting that the agenda item, there'll be an open board meeting. The agenda item will be association organization. And by
Okay.
that I mean now's the time the board will elect their officers, president, vice president, et cetera,
Okay,
like
that makes sense.
It's an open board meeting. It's done in front of all your homeowners at that point in time. And remember I mentioned you have some other people that could be officers. You might have somebody who's a CPA that has volunteered to be your treasurer, for instance.
Okay.
And, you know, they could be elected as an officer at that point in time. But it is a different meeting.
Okay.
It's a members' meeting, it's adjourned, and your new open board meeting to organize yourself
Okay.
is constituted, and then that's adjourned. So at this point in
Okay.
time, now, we've done it all. We've nominated, we've elected, we've certified, we filled any vacancies. We have a board, we're good to go for the
Okay.
next year. I think that's pretty good, huh?
That sounds great. Here comes another monkey wrench.
I was afraid you were going to say that.
So what happens if a board member needs to be removed for a violation or some kind of a problem? Is that possible?
Sure. So that would be a recall election, and in the state, recall or removal election can be done with cause or without cause. And let's say a board member has decided they just don't want to come to meetings anymore, they don't want to function. And your homeowners are pretty smart people, they figure that out. So they go, well, let's remove him from the board. So the procedure, pretty straightforward. The state would say they can circulate a petition amongst themselves to get at least 10%. Now your governing directives might, your documents and bylaws might specify a little higher percentage, but regardless, 10% is what the state will tell you.
Okay.
Circulate the petition that calls for the removal of a board member, whoever, or whatever reason. That petition then is presented to the executive board, or maybe your community manager gets it. At that point in time, then the board must schedule a recall election. So the ballots have to go out, okay? I think the time frame is a minimum of like 15 days to a max of 60 that you have to have the ballots out for a recall or removal election. It's done by secret ballot. So this time, no campaigning, okay? No
That makes
informational
sense.
statements.
Right.
So the ballot goes out, basically probably says yes for removal or no for removal.
Okay.
Ballots come back in, and then the board will schedule another special members meeting. Remember I talked about
we
special
did-
meeting?
you did
This
talk
would be
about
a
that,
special
yes.
meeting. And so you would gather then at the next special members meeting.
Mm-hmm.
You would have a ballot counting committee. They would open the ballots and count them.
Okay.
The results would be known. So now, if in fact during the results, if 35% of your homeowners who are voting members vote in the majority to remove a member, then they're removed.
Okay.
But it's important to remember that it has to be in a majority and it has to be a minimum of 35%.
Okay.
So therefore, the member has been removed, and now we're back to filling vacancies, and we start again. So
Okay.
that's how we go about removing a member
Okay.
on the board.
All right. So it sounds like we've come full circle here.
Yeah.
You've been very, very helpful, and we appreciate your time. I'd like to give you one more chance if there's any additional item you'd like to mention before we close.
Well, you know, thinking back as a board member, it's important to remember to be reasonable in your activities with your community and your homeowners. I mean, if you're reasonable with them, they'll probably be and respond responsibly to you. And I'm reminded of a periodical that was put out by CAI. I don't remember exactly which one it was, but it talks about harmony and contentment in a homeowners association. It simply says, if board members understand their responsibility and homeowners understand their responsibility, your community is going to function real well. So that's kind of what I strive for, and I would stress that all board members out there, take that to heart. You'll have a good community if you do. I think that's about it.
Okay. Well, I like your comment about harmony and contentment. Don't we all strive for that in our communities? That would
Hope
be
so.
the perfect life. So thank you again, Chuck, for
You're
your
welcome.
time, and thank you for your time and attention. We hope this presentation of CIC Meetings and Elections was useful to you. If you have any further questions, please visit our website to download additional CAI Nevada Media Education programs at cai-nevada.org.